This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right, strap yourselves in because we are diving deep into one of history's biggest controversies.
Oh, I love a good controversy.
That's the spirit. Today, we're tackling the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Ah, yes, a decision that really shaped the world as we know it.
It sure did. And we've got a mountain of sources to sift through.
Oh, lay it on me, I'm ready.
We've got intercepted messages, historical analyses, and even conflicting opinions from top experts.
Juicy. So what's the big question we're trying to answer in all of this?
It all boils down to this. Was ending World War II the only reason for dropping these incredibly destructive weapons?
I'm sensing a but coming.
You know me too well. Or was the U.S. also trying to flex its muscles, contain the Soviet Union and their whole communist ideology?
Okay, now that's a deep dive I can get behind. So where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, to understand this, we need to step back in time. It's July 1945, the Potsdam Conference.
Potsdam. Okay, the war in Europe's just wrapped up, but the Pacific Theater is still raging, right?
Exactly. And right at this critical juncture, boom, the U.S. successfully tests the atomic bomb.
Talk about a game changer. Dropping that news at a conference like that.
You can just imagine the tension in the room, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You've got Truman, the U.S. president, suddenly holding all the cards.
And he knows it. Historian Scott Liggess even argues that this newfound confidence directly influenced how Truman dealt with Stalin at Potsdam.
I bet. No more Mr. Nice Guy.
Not even close. Truman starts pushing back against Soviet involvement in the Pacific. No more compromises. He's taking a hard line on how the post-war world's going to look.
Wow. It's like, hey, we've got the biggest stick now, so we make the rules. Talk about a power shift.
Exactly. And this leads us to a pretty crucial development, the Potsdam Declaration.
What now?
It was basically an ultimatum to Japan, demanding their surrender. But here's the kicker. The U.S. purposely excluded the Soviet Union from it.
Hold on. They were a key ally in the war. Why shut them out?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a major red flag. Almost like they were intentionally sidelining the Soviets and wanted to dictate the peace terms without them.
So it wasn't just about defeating Japan. There's a bigger game at play here.
You got it. And to really grasp why this move was so significant, we need to understand this concept of unconditional surrender.
Ah, yes. Surrender with no strings attached, right?
Right. For the Allies, it meant Japan would have zero say in the peace terms, complete submission. But for Japan, with their emperor being seen as practically a god.
Being tried as a war criminal was unthinkable.
You hit the nail on the head. So the Allies saw it as the only way to ensure peace, while Japan saw it as pure humiliation.
Oh, I can see how that would cause some tension. Now put yourself in Stalin's shoes for a second.
Okay, I'm Stalin. What am I feeling?
You just saw the U.S. unveil this weapon of unimaginable power and use it to dictate the end of the war, your war. That's why folks like physicist Yuli Karatin called it atomic blackmail.
Atomic blackmail. That's a powerful phrase. So they weren't just trying to beat Japan, they were sending a message to the Soviets.
You bet. A message loud and clear. Don't mess with us. We've got the bomb.
Okay, so we've got this tense standoff brewing with the U.S. flexing their nuclear muscles and the Soviets getting nervous. But here's where things get really interesting.
Hit me with it.
We've got this intercepted message from July 11th, 1945, just weeks before the bombs drop, and it reveals that Emperor Hirohito was already frantically searching for a way to end the war.
Wow, so Japan was already looking for an exit.
Desperate for one. They couldn't stomach unconditional surrender, but they knew they couldn't keep fighting.
So what did they do? Did they just throw in the towel?
Not exactly. They were trying to cut a deal and negotiate a peace through the
The
Soviets.
Soviets, but they were neutral in the Pacific.
Exactly. Japan had a deep distrust of the West, stemming from centuries of, colonialism and all that.
Ah, so they saw the Soviets as a possible way out, maybe a less humiliating surrender?
Right. And here's the thing. The U.S. knew about all of this. Intelligence reports show they were fully aware of Japan's desire to negotiate and their attempts to bring the Soviets in.
So they knew Japan was looking for a peaceful way out, yet they still dropped the bombs.
That's the heart of the debate, isn't it? By excluding the Soviets from the Potsdam Declaration and then using the bombs, the U.S. ensured they called all the shots in the post-war Pacific.
Wow. They basically shut down any chance of a negotiated peace and solidified their control over the region, all in one fell swoop.
It's a tangled web, that's for sure. And as you can imagine, historians have been debating this for decades, trying to unpack the true motives behind the atomic bombs.
I can only imagine the arguments. So how do historians make sense of all this?
Well, they've come up with several different schools of thought, each offering a unique perspective on this pivotal moment in history.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's break down these different viewpoints and see what they reveal about this controversial decision.
Sounds like a plan. Let's start with the one that dominated the narrative for years. The Orthodox view.
Orthodox, meaning traditional. Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the gist of this view?
Basically, it argues that the atomic bombs, as horrific as they were a necessary evil.
Necessary. How so?
Well, proponents of this view, like historian Richard Overy, emphasize the potential nightmare of a land invasion of Japan, what they called Operation Downfall.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about that. Wasn't it supposed to be absolutely brutal?
Absolutely. Military planners estimated it could have cost hundreds of thousands of American lives, not to mention the Japanese casualties.
So in their view, the bombs were a horrible but necessary way to end the war quickly and save lives.
Exactly. And they also point to the fanatical resistance the U.S. faced in places like Iwo Jima and Okinawa.
Yeah, those battles were incredibly fierce. The Japanese fought with incredible determination.
Right, and they argue this shows that Japan would fought to the bitter end, even if it meant massive civilian losses.
It's a sobering thought. But are there any other perspectives on this?
Oh, absolutely. There's another school of thought that directly challenges this view.
Okay, let's hear it. What's their take on this?
This is what's called the revisionist view. And historians like Gar Alperovitz are leading the charge here.
Revisionists, so they're revising the traditional narrative. What's their argument?
Their core argument is that Japan was already teetering on the edge of surrender, making the bombs unnecessary from a purely military perspective.
So if they were already close to surrender, then why drop the bombs?
The revisionists believe it was a show of force, a way for the U.S. to send a message to the rising Soviet superpower.
So it's less about ending the war with Japan and more about shaping the post-war world, flexing their nuclear muscles for the Soviets to see.
You got it. And they point to those intercepted messages we talked about earlier, the ones showing Japan was desperately trying to negotiate a peace.
Right. They were just stuck on that unconditional surrender demand.
Exactly. And the revisionists argue that the U.S. could have secured a surrender without resorting to atomic weapons, maybe by giving some concessions like letting Japan keep their emperor.
Interesting. So it's like they're saying, hey, we could have ended this peacefully, but we chose to make a statement. A very big, very explosive statement.
Precisely. It's a powerful argument, and it definitely adds another layer of complexity to this whole debate.
No kidding. So we've got two very different takes here. The Orthodox view emphasizing military necessity and the revisionist view highlighting Cold War politics. Are there any other lenses we should look through?
You bet. There are actually two more schools of thought that offer some valuable insights. Let's talk about the realist view next.
Realist view. Okay, lay it on me. What's their angle?
The realists try to find a middle ground between the Orthodox and revisionist camps. They see it as a combination of factors.
So they're not picking sides, more like acknowledging the complexity of the situation.
Exactly. Historians like John Lewis Gaddis agree that ending the war quickly and saving lives was crucial, but they also acknowledge the bomb's strategic value in the context of this brewing Cold War.
So they're saying the U.S. had multiple motives, and you can't really separate the desire to end the war from this ambition to project power and influence in the post-war world.
You got it. It's like saying we needed to end the war, but we also weren't blind to how this new weapon could reshape the global landscape.
Two birds, one very big stone, so to speak. Okay, what about that last perspective you mentioned?
Ah, yes, that's the diplomatic view. And this one puts the Cold War front and center in its analysis. They argue that the bombings were less about ending the war with Japan and more about sending a very clear message to the Soviet Union.
Okay, I'm really interested to hear more about this. What's their reasoning?
Well, historians like P.M.S. Blackett saw the atomic bombings as the first shot in the Cold War.
Wow, like a declaration of war before the war even began.
Exactly. It was a demonstration of American power designed to contain Soviet expansionism. The defeat of Japan, in their view, was almost a secondary objective.
So they're saying the U.S. could have pursued other paths to peace, maybe involving the Soviets more or offering Japan better terms, but they chose the bombs to send Moscow a message they couldn't ignore.
That's the essence of their argument. It's about establishing dominance, shaping the post-war world, and keeping the Soviets in check.
It's incredible how one event can have so many interpretations, all backed by evidence. So where do we go from here?
That's the beauty of history, isn't it? It's not about finding one right answer. It's about grappling with these complex questions, weighing the evidence, and understanding that there might not be a simple solution.
It's like we've laid out all the pieces of a giant puzzle, but figuring out how they fit together is the real challenge.
You nailed it. And as we dig deeper into those specific sources you provided, this complexity is only going to become more apparent.
I'm ready to dive in. What other fascinating insights are hidden within these documents?
Well, let's start by taking a closer look at that intercepted message from Emperor Hirohito. It reveals a lot more than just Japan's desire for peace. It gives us a glimpse into their internal struggles, their fears, and the immense pressure they were facing.
Okay, let's see what secrets this message holds and how it might challenge or support those different historical interpretations we just discussed. This intercepted message, you see, it's more than just Japan saying, hey, we want out.
Right, it's not a white flag.
It goes deeper than that. It's like we're getting a look inside their heads, a nation teetering on the edge.
They're facing impossible choices, right?
Exactly. How do you end a war? You can't win, but also save face. Avoid total humiliation.
It must have been agonizing. Stuck between fighting a losing battle and accepting a surrender that felt like complete defeat.
And don't forget the emperor's role in all this.
Oh, right. He was practically a god to them.
Exactly. To have him put on trial as a war criminal, which is what the Allies wanted,
That would have been devastating for Japan.
their entire world would have crumbled. So they're desperate for a way out, but every option seems awful.
And that's where they turned to the Soviets, right?
Bingo. Japan, they had a long history of not trusting the West.
Centuries of colonialism and feeling exploited, all that.
You got it. So they look at the Soviets, who were still officially neutral in the Pacific War.
And they see them as a potential go-between.
Someone who might understand their culture a bit more, help them negotiate a surrender that wouldn't be utterly humiliating.
It's amazing how this one message opens up a whole hidden world of diplomacy and desperation.
It's like we're uncovering a secret plot.
And the craziest part is the U.S. knew about all of this.
They were eavesdropping.
Exactly. Intelligence reports show they knew Japan wanted to negotiate, knew they were trying to get the Soviets involved.
Okay, hold up. So the U.S. knew Japan was looking for a peaceful way out.
Yeah.
But they still chose to drop the bombs. Why?
That's the question that keeps historians up at night, right? Some argue that the U.S. didn't trust Japan, thought they might just use negotiations to stall for time.
By time, rearm, something like that.
Right. But others, especially those revisionist folks, say the U.S. had another agenda.
They wanted
Wow.
to impress the Soviets, show off their new toy, even if it meant ditching a potential diplomatic solution.
You're getting it. And as we go deeper into the source material, we find even more evidence that supports this idea of atomic diplomacy.
Okay, like what?
Well, there are these diaries and memoirs from the Secretary of War, Henry Stimson.
He was a pretty big player back then.
Oh, yeah, right in the thick of it. And his writings give us a glimpse into the minds of the people making these decisions.
What do they say?
They suggest Stimson saw the atomic bombs as more than just a weapon to end the war. He saw them as a tool to shape the world.
Treat it how?
He was really worried about the Soviets expanding in Asia. He believed that showing off the bomb's power would scare them straight, keep them from messing with U.S. interests.
So it wasn't just about Japan anymore. It was about establishing America as the top dog in this New World Order. It sounds like those diplomatic view historians might have a point.
They might. And when you look at it from the Soviet perspective, this idea of a power play becomes even more clear.
What were the Soviets saying?
Guys like Stalin and physicist Yuli Khariton, they saw the bombings as a direct threat.
Of course they did. The U.S. just dropped 2 atomic bombs.
It was a display of raw power meant to intimidate them, limit their influence on the world stage.
It's like these 2 superpowers are already sizing each other up, even before the Cold War officially kicks off.
You could say that. And the atomic bombings become a defining moment in this rivalry, fueling Soviet paranoia and mistrust for decades to come.
It really makes you think about the ripple effects of decisions like these, how they can shape the course of history in ways you'd never expect.
Absolutely. But amidst all this political strategy and global chess playing, we can't lose sight of something crucial.
What's that?
The human cost. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki caused immense suffering.
We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people killed, entire cities wiped out.
Exactly. And it's easy to get lost in the big picture, the political maneuvering, but those were real people, real lives shattered.
You're right. We can't forget that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the immediate casualties.
Right. There were the survivors, the Hibakusha, who faced not only the physical injuries, but also the social stigma, the psychological trauma of living through such a horrific event.
Their stories are heartbreaking, but they also show the incredible resilience of the human spirit, how people find a way to rebuild and keep going even after facing the unimaginable.
It's a powerful testament to the human will to survive, but it also serves as a constant reminder of the devastating legacy of these weapons.
A legacy that reaches far beyond Japan. The atomic bombings changed warfare forever. Suddenly, mass destruction was a reality.
It forced the world to confront the terrifying power humanity now possessed.
And that's a weight we still carry today, the knowledge that we have the ability to destroy ourselves.
It's a heavy burden, no doubt. But even though the bombings happened over 70 years ago, the questions they raise, the dilemmas they pose, they're still relevant today.
More relevant than ever, I'd say. We're still grappling with the same issues. Power, technology, the search for peace.
So we've explored the historical context, the different perspectives, the diplomatic gamesmanship, and the human toll. As we process all this, what key takeaways should we keep in mind?
Well, I think the biggest one is that history is rarely black and white. The decision to use the atomic bombs wasn't simple. There's no easy answer to the why.
It was a mix of things. Military necessity, political strategy, fear, ambition, maybe even arrogance.
You have to understand the nuances, the competing narratives, and accept that even with all the evidence we have, there's still room for debate, for different interpretations.
And as we move forward, knowing this history, can we learn from it, maybe prevent similar tragedies from happening again?
That's the hope, isn't it? To learn from the mistakes of the past and strive for a more peaceful future.
You provided some fascinating sources for this deep dive, and there's one in particular that I think adds another layer to this whole story.
Oh yeah, which one?
The minutes from a meeting held by the Interim Committee in May of 1945.
The Interim Committee. Refresh my memory.
This was a group tasked with advising President Truman on using the atomic bomb.
Oh, wow. Right at the heart of the decision-making process. What do these minutes tell us?
They give us a window into the ethical and strategic discussions happening at the highest levels, the agonizing choices they faced.
Okay, I'm really curious to hear what they were wrestling with. Let's dive into those minutes and see what they reveal.
These interim committee minutes, it's like we're flies on the wall in the room where it happened.
Yeah, a room full of some of the brightest minds of the time.
Scientists, politicians, ethical advisors, all wrestling with this enormous decision.
A decision that would change the world forever. No pressure. Right.
What were some of the things they were debating?
Well, one big one was whether to use the bomb directly on a Japanese city or maybe do a demonstration first.
A demonstration like on an uninhabited island or something?
Exactly. The idea was to show Japan the devastating power of the bomb, hopefully scare them into surrendering without actually causing mass casualties.
Makes sense. More humane, less destruction.
Right, but some argued that a demonstration might not be convincing enough.
What if the Japanese just called their bluff?
Exactly. Or what if the bomb malfunctioned and didn't even go off? That would have been a PR nightmare.
They were worried about losing face, looking weak on the world stage.
And there was another concern, too. A demonstration would give Japan time to move their prisoners of war.
Potentially using them as human shields.
A horrific thought, but a real possibility they had to consider.
So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Try to end the war quickly, but with minimal casualties, but also send a clear message to the world, especially the Soviets.
And speaking of the Soviets, their presence looms large in these minutes.
The Cold War is already casting a shadow over everything, even though it hasn't officially begun.
Right. Several members of the committee argued that using the bomb wasn't just about defeating Japan.
It was also about flexing their muscles, showing the Soviets what they were capable of.
Like a warning shot. Don't even think about messing with us. We've got this.
So, even in these secret meetings, the Cold War is playing out in their minds.
2 wars, 1 bomb, a recipe for some tough decisions.
And as we know, they ultimately decided to use the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. No demonstration, no direct involvement of the Soviets.
A decision with consequences that we're still grappling with today.
As we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like we've only scratched the surface of this complex issue.
There's so much more to uncover, so many different perspectives to consider.
But one thing's for sure. The atomic bombings were a pivotal moment in history, one that shaped the course of the 20th century and continues to resonate in the 21st.
And it forces us to ask tough questions about war, peace, the use of devastating technology.
About the choices we make and the responsibilities that come with wielding such immense power.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, explored different interpretations, delved into the source material.
But ultimately, we have to remember that history is made up of individual stories.
The stories of the people who lived through these events, the ones who made the decisions, and the ones who suffer the consequences.
Their experiences, their perspectives, they enrich our understanding of the past and challenge us to create a better future.
A future where, hopefully, such tragedies are never repeated.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning from the past.
And let's work together to build a future where peace prevails and the horrors of atomic warfare are relegated to the history books.
On that note, we'll bring this deep dive to a close. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those conversations flowing.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.